Hello, Robs. We're back with Clarice Lispector's Near to the Wild Heart. This is chapter 6. Joanna's pleasures. Don't mind my sneezing fits, which may occur since that appears to be the trend for the day. Here, let's go. The freedom she often experienced did not come from lucid reflections, but from a state that seemed to consist of perceptions, much too organic to be expressed in thoughts. Sometimes at the heart of that sensation there was the glimmering of an idea which made her vaguely aware of her species and coloring. The state she slipped into when she murmured eternity. The very thought acquired the nature of eternity. It deepened as if by magic and expanded without any proper content or form, but also without dimensions. She had the impression that if she could manage to retain that sensation for a few more seconds, she would experience a revelation effortlessly, like seeing the rest of the world simply by leaning away from the earth and out into space. Eternity was not only time, but something akin to the deeply rooted certainty of not being able to hold it in one's body because of death, the impossibility of suppressing eternity. Just as an almost abstract feeling of absolute purity was eternal. But the clearest suggestion of eternity stemmed from the impossibility of knowing how many human beings would succeed her own body, which would one day distance itself from the present with the velocity of a shooting star. She defined eternity, and explanations were inevitably born like the pulsations of the heart. She would not change a single word, for they were her truth. They no sooner appeared, however, than they became devoid of any logic. To define eternity as a quantity greater than time and greater even than the time the human mind can sustain thought would not permit her, even so, to perceive its duration. Its essential quality was not to have any quantity, not to be measurable and divisible, because everything which could be measured and divided had a beginning and an end. Eternity was not the infinitely great quantity that exhausted itself. Eternity was succession. Then Joanna suddenly understood that the greatest beauty was to be found in succession. That movement explained form. There was something so elevated and pure when one cried out, "Movement explains form." And in succession, one also discovered sorrow, because the body was much slower than the movement of uninterrupted continuity. Imagination captured and possessed the future of the present, while the body remained at the beginning of the road, living in another rhythm, blind to the experience of the spirit. Through these perceptions, by means of them, Joanna made something exist. She connected with a happiness that was self-sufficient. There were lots of pleasant sensations. To climb a mountain, to linger on the summit, and, without looking around, to feel the presence of that conquered territory she had left behind. Her uncle's farm way off in the distance. The wind catching her clothes, her hair, her arms free, her heart closing and opening savagely, but her face bright and serene beneath the sun, and knowing above all that the earth beneath her feet was so deep and secret that there was no need to fear the invasion of understanding dissolving its mystery. This sensation had the hallmark of glory. Certain moments of music. Music belonged to the same category as thought. Both vibrated in the same movement and species. It possessed the same quality of a thought so intimate that upon hearing that music, the thought itself was revealed. A thought so intimate that upon hearing someone repeat the subtle nuances of those sounds, Joanna found herself surprised, as if she had been invaded and dispersed. She no longer even heard the harmony once it was diffused, for then it was no longer hers, or even when she listened to it a number of times, which destroyed the analogy. For her thought never repeated itself, while music could be played over and over again and sound exactly as before. Thought was only equal to music creating itself. Joanna did not identify herself closely with all the sounds, only with those that were pure, and what she loved here was neither tragic nor comic. There was also much to see. Certain moments of seeing were as valid as those flowers on a grave. What one saw passed into existence. Joanna, however, was not expecting some vision and a miracle announced by the angel Gabriel. She was as astonished at what she had already perceived, suddenly seeing something for the first time, suddenly realizing that something was constantly alive, like a barking dog outlined against the sky. That was something apart that required no further explanation. An open door swinging to and fro, creaking in the evening silence. And suddenly, yes, there was the real thing. An old portrait of someone whom you don't know and are never likely to recognize because the portrait is old or because the person in the portrait has turned to ashes. This little distraction brought a moment of welcome respite. Also a mast without a flag, erect and mute, fixed into position on a summer's day, both the face and body blind. In order to have a vision, the thing did not have to be sad or happy or to manifest itself. It was enough to exist, preferably still and silent, in order to feel its mark. Dear God, the mark of existence. But this was not something to be pursued, since all that existed perforce existed. The vision, in fact, consisted in surprising the symbol of things and the things themselves. She found these discoveries confusing, but this also lent a certain grace. How to clarify herself, for example. What long, sharp lines did the mark clearly have? They were sharp and thin. At a given moment, they were nothing but lines, ending up exactly as they had started. Interrupted, constantly interrupted, not because they were likely to come to an end, but because no one could terminate them. The circles were more perfect, less tragic, and did not move her sufficiently. A circle was the work of man, completed before death, and God himself couldn't improve on that finish. While straight, thin, free lines were like thoughts, there were other things that confused her. She remembered Joanna as a little girl looking out to sea, the tranquility that came from the eyes of an ox, the tranquility that came from that sprawling expanse of sea. From the sea's deep womb, from the cat lying rigid on the pavement, all is one, she had chanted. The confusion stemmed from the entwinement of the sea, the cat and the ox with Joanna herself. The confusion also arose because she did not know whether she had discovered all is one when she was still a little girl standing looking out to sea, or later when she remembered those moments. Meanwhile, the confusion didn't only confer a certain grace, but also a sense of reality. It struck her that if she were to order and clearly explain what she had experienced, she would have destroyed the essence of all as one. In her confusion, she was unwittingly truth itself, which probably gave her a greater capacity for life than knowledge of life. This truth, even though revealed, would be of no use to Joanna, because it didn't form her stem but her root, fastening her body to everything that was no longer hers, imponderable and elusive. Oh, there were motives for happiness, happiness without laughter, serious, profound, fresh. Whenever she discovered things about herself, the very moment she spoke, her thoughts were running, parallel to the words. One day she had told Ottavio about Joanna's childhood, and the housemaid who invented more games than anyone she had ever known, and how she pretended to be dreaming. Are you sleeping? I'm fast asleep. Then wake up, it's morning. Did you dream? At first she dreamed of sheep, of going to school, of cats drinking milk. Little by little she dreamed of blue sheep, of going to school in the middle of the woods, of cats drinking milk from golden saucers. And her dreams became increasingly dense and acquired colors that were difficult to dilute into words. I dreamed what that white balls were rising inside. What balls? Inside where? I don't know, only that they were coming. After listening to her, Ottavio had remarked, I'm beginning to think that they abandoned you much too soon. Your aunt's house, strangers, the boarding school. Joanna had thought, but there was the teacher. However, she replied, no. What else could they have done with me? Surely, having had a childhood is everything one could wish for. No one could take that away from me. And at this moment, she was intrigued to discover that she was starting to listen to herself. I wouldn't like to go back to being a child, not even for a second. Ottavio had continued, distracted, no doubt thinking back to the days of his cousin Isabel and sweet Lydia, not even for a second. Nor me, Joanna had hastened to reply, not even for a second. I feel no nostalgia, do you understand? And at that moment she declared in a loud, deliberate tone of amazement, it isn't nostalgia, for I now enjoy my childhood more fully than I did as a child. Yes, there were many happy things mingled in her blood. And Joanna could also think and feel in various different ways simultaneously. And so, while Ottavio had been speaking, even as she listened to him, she had been looking out of the window at a little old woman in the sun, grubby, frail, and nimble, a branch quivering in the breeze, a dry branch where there was so much femininity. Joanna had thought that the poor woman might have had a son if life had not dried up in her body. Later, even as Joanna was replying to Ottavio, she remembered the lines her father had written specially to amuse her during one of those what is there for me to do outbursts. Margarita befriended Violetta. The one was blind, the other mad. The blind girl knew what the mad girl was saying and ended up seeing what no one else saw. Just like a wheel turning and turning, disturbing the air and creating a breeze. Even to suffer was good because while the basest suffering unfolded, one also existed, like a river apart. And one could also await the instant that came, and suddenly precipitated into the present only to dissolve, and another that came. Okay, okay, Clarice. Clarice!